Hey everyone, we're here just to do a quick little review for Unit 2B to make sure that you're all set for this test that is coming up. First of all, as we're looking at this, we want to make sure that you guys know the correct political empires for the test. And that's going to be the Persian Empire. You want to know about Greece with Athens and Sparta, some of the similarities and differences. The Hellenistic Empire, so you don't have a pieces on that one. That's just real quick. And then the Roman Republic and the Empire. Know the differences between the two of those. Here's just a few things that you want to make sure that you study as you're looking over these things, looking at the study blue terms, etc. You want to know the main political leaders. We talked about Cyrus, Darius, and Xerxes, and you can look up more information on each of those in your notes. But you will want to know the chronological order of those and kind of what each one of them did. We did talk about how Cyrus was able to free the Jews and allow them to come back, and as that connects back to Judaism and Christianity and talking about the temple. So we did that. We knew that they were also, both Cyrus and Darius, very accepting, and they paid their monumental workers, and you could practice different religions within the Persian Empire. We also know, especially when we're looking at Darius and Xerxes, that they were very involved in the Persian Wars. When we're looking at the fighting that happened between Persia and Greece. So make sure that you know the key things about each of those leaders. Understand that politically it was very much a kingship that we saw there, that it was kind of a very big deal if you were around any of these political leaders. And there's kind of like this aura of how you follow them. You don't want to breathe in their presence or say something like. So there's definitely this kind of cultship, this like revering the king, and that happened during Persia. Vocab words know about the qanats, as we looked at kind of what we called those underground aqueducts, the ways that they got water in the geography which they were located in, since it's very arid. And then also know about the satraps, those governors over the provinces, in a way that they were able to kind of maintain that giant empire that they had. When we're looking then at Athens, kind of the other side of this, you want to know three key leaders. Pheidippides isn't necessarily a political leader, but you want to know he's the guy that ran when they were being attacked by the Persians at Marathon. Themistocles is a political leader, absolutely. We talked about his use of the triremes and the ways that he kind of got into power the way that he did and was able to then defend Athens against the Persians. We also saw how he used the money to buy and purchase the triremes. We also saw that it didn't go so well for him. Ultimately, was being ostracized. So just a few key things there. We know that when we get into the golden age of Athens, Pericles was the leader there, responsible for the building of the Parthenon. So those are some big things. Again, the Persian Wars, or the Greco-Persian Wars, was a conflict Athens was in, and Athens and Sparta was in with Persia. And then we know after that period of time, the Peloponnesian War was the conflict that happened between Athens and Sparta. Key vocab words that I would make sure that you study is direct democracies. We talked about how they voted in the Athenian the assembly. Tyrants and how people got into power with irregular means in just kind of very different way. And then the hoplites and who they were and the way that they fought and the armor that they used as well. Be aware of the geography also of Greece and understanding that kind of even before this, like Greece was a very unusual spot for an empire to emerge. Since their geography wasn't prone to agricultural surpluses, meaning that as the population increased, it was very hard for them to sustain that. And so the ways that they could do that then was kind of getting colonies around the Mediterranean. But just be aware of that. We also know that on the other end of kind of the Greek peninsula, we're looking at Sparta, or the Peloponnesian Peninsula actually. We're looking at Sparta. We know that Spartan life was very different than Athenian life. Very military driven. It was an oligarchy. And so we're looking at those different aspects there. We know that women had a lot more rights in Sparta just because of the way their society was, and the men were away, so the women had to have more rights and were able to do more things. The biggest battle that we kind of hear with the Persian Wars is we hear about the Battle of Thermopylae, which is in 300, but just be familiar with that. And then later on knowing about the Peloponnesian War, which again is between Athens and Sparta. After both of these kind of played out their roles, we know that they're kind of weakened, and neither Athens nor Sparta were ultimately as powerful as they once were. And this kind of paved the way for these Hellenistic empires to come. We know that Philip II of Macedon will ultimately unify Greece and kind of take over, and there will not be the same kind of Athens and Sparta that we once knew before, and kind of the city-state form. And this is the first time we've really unified Greece, as they were very separated just because of their local geography. After the Philip II dies, Alexander the Great, his son, takes over, and he's actually going to move forward beyond just Greece and into the Persian Empire, in which he will conquer. Now, we talked about, like, from the crash course, why was he so great, and why do people consider him Alexander the Great? And some of it we said was somewhat legendary, and a lot of it happened after his death, and we don't have a lot of it, so he just kind of gained some steam. And ultimately, just because of how much the land that he conquered. But we also said that he was really good at tearing down and not necessarily maintaining the empire. After his death, he was very young. The empire that he kind of built was then split up between his generals and made 3 different Hellenistic empires. So just being aware of those different things is really important for the test. Also understanding what Hellenism is, as we talked about the spreading of a Greek culture into a non-Greek world. So when we find, for example, coins in Afghanistan that have Greek writing, or ruins in Turkey with Greek writing, etc., or architecture that looks just like Athens, but we find in different places in the Middle East. Those are examples of Hellenism. So make sure that you're aware of that, and you'll be in good shape. And then the last major political empire we're looking at is the Roman Republic, and we know that it went from having the Etruscans who migrated there, moving from Etruscan kings into the Republic stage. The Republic technically started in 509. We know that Republic means that there's representatives. And then you want to also be aware of the social classes, the difference between patricians and plebeians, patricians being kind of the aristocracy, and then also understanding the plebeians are kind of the common folk. And there's a lot of fighting and conflict between them. At one point, the plebeians threatened to leave if they don't kind of get more rights. We talked about the office of tribunes, where they were going to be kind of a representative in different ways, where they would then be able to get more say and could veto different things that were coming out of the Senate. And then the 12 tables ultimately was kind of the end of that, and where they posted in the forum kind of the rules, and they spelled out so they understood who had what rights and the equality between the two classes. And then more and more the plebeians began to dominate and have more control during this time. Now obviously the big conflict that happened, if you rewind a bit, is the conflict between Carthage and Rome. This happened during the Punic Wars. Ultimately Rome will be victorious. They'll actually march on Carthage, destroy the city. And so that's kind of important. But that kind of showed their dominance in the Western Mediterranean. And then other key people you want to be aware of: Julius Caesar, obviously we talked a lot about him, Pompey and Crassus. Together these guys make the first triumvirate, and you want to know this. Ultimately this little coalition, if you will, didn't work out so well. There's going to be that part where we have them kind of declaring against each other. One of them will die. One will say, "Hey, Caesar, lay down your arms and come back to Rome." And he marched and crossed the Rubicon, and not so great. And so there's a civil war. Obviously, Caesar became victorious, but ultimately in the end, there's going to be that plot by what we call the liberators, saying that Julius Caesar is becoming too powerful. He's becoming like a king. Let's eliminate him. But ultimately, that backfired. And then in the end, we see that it ends. And after that, we get into an empire stage. People were really angry at the death of that and blamed the liberators for that. And so Mark Antony was one of those key people. And he came out and said, basically, you killed him, and this is terrible. And that's why after his life, they changed and went from Julius Caesar into Octavian, and he became the first emperor or first citizen of Rome. And Mark Antony supported him as well. We know that Brutus was the one who killed Julius Caesar at the end, kind of the last blow, but he was kind of heading up the liberators. Other key emperors that we need to just be aware of is Nero. We talked about him and the way that he persecuted Christians, the way that, as it's kind of said, he burned down the city, wasn't always the best, supported gladiator games in a lot of ways. Much later on, jumping to around the 50s, the 51st emperor is Diocletian, who divided the empire. As we remember, Diocletian divided. And set up kind of the Eastern and the Western Roman Empire as a way to kind of maintain the control that they once had, and they just couldn't keep it. It was so big, so overextended, and this is a way to kind of keep it. And for a while that worked, and as you guys probably did some studying, that didn't work in the long term. Constantine was another one, 57th emperor. He was the one that converted to Christianity, so Constantine, Christianity, also founded the city of Constantinople and actually moved kind of the imperial headquarters over that way as well in the city of Constantinople, which was much more fortified. And again, kind of Rome is just declining at this point. So key people you need to know, and you need to know the difference between The Republic, when there's representatives in the Senate, really, along with the consuls, is kind of the control. Then we're going to see this shift where the Senate still exists, but it's not as powerful as the emperor. And we move into this stage of the empire. A few key things, and you guys probably know this backwards and forwards, reasons for the collapse: barbarian invasions, mercenaries. They paid people to be fighting to defend the Roman Empire, but they were not always so loyal because ultimately they weren't, and they were just getting paid. And if there wasn't money, because then we started having economic problems, and so once you started having that problem, you couldn't pay your mercenaries, and they're not going to fight because of their love for Rome, because they're not even from there. Ultimately, they're going to have inflation issues. They're so overextended in their empire, they can't maintain it. They're trying to spend a lot of money on the military to maintain it. That doesn't work and goes back to our other problems in bullet points 2 and 3. It's just kind of a disaster. Ultimately, the Eastern Roman Empire is rising up and becoming more powerful and more fortified, and Rome again is just declining, and ultimately will fall in 476 CE. The other part of the test that you want to study for is the philosophies and religions. The ones that you need to know: Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Greek rationalism, and philosophy, and then Christianity. Understanding that Greek rationalism and philosophy is not technically a religion, but again, a philosophy. Zoroastrianism, we talked about this. Zoroaster was the prophet. Ahura Mazda was kind of the main god. They may argue they're monotheistic, but we know that they're more dualistic because they believe in other deities and different things as well, especially kind of that dualistic good and bad god. It was a Persian religion. It was supported by the state for a period of time, and it never really kind of caught on more than in the Persian Empire. It wasn't a universal religion. They did not seek out converts, but it was just kind of to that local area. Judaism also was a major religion within the Persian Empire. We know that Cyrus, again, allowed the Jews to come back after they were kind of kicked out by the Babylonians. And so we see that the major beliefs here, again, this is where we talked about Hebrew monotheism. This emerged kind of this first time this thought came around of a one God, and his name is Yahweh. And we see that this Yahweh had a really personal relationship with Abraham, and he created this covenant that he's going to kind of make his descendants as numerous as the stars, and that there's going to ultimately someday be this promised land for them, which we talked about as Canaan. And so there's this covenant relationship between the Hebrew people and Yahweh, their God. Ultimately, down the line, we also have Moses, where God gives the law, and they have, like, if you look at their Hebrew scriptures, they have it really kind of spelled out how to live and kind of how to offer sacrifices and how to kind of live life to atone for your wrongdoing. And so we see this relationship, this covenant between Yahweh and the Hebrew people. It was not a universal religion. It was only for that one group of people. People could not convert to Judaism, and still can't today. But they also are looking for a Messiah, a political leader that will then kind of bring them back to what they believe they should be. Greek rationalism philosophies, you want to know these three philosophers: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, all emerging out of Greece. We know that each of the ones below it are disciples of the other. So Plato was a disciple of Socrates. Socrates was big about his questioning and understanding what is real, and so he asked lots of questions. Plato wrote the Apology, and he wrote the Republic. The Apology talks about the trial of Socrates, and he also then studied the theory of forms. Aristotle, much more science-focused and rational thought. And so these three together, remember, if you're going in order: Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, SPA, SPA. So remember those as well. And then last but not least, Christianity is the last religion. We talked about how this emerged under the context of the Roman Empire in Judea. Jesus of Nazareth was a Jew. He grew up Jewish. He became a rabbi, and he began to be a teacher like many other rabbis, but he made different people quite angry with his life. He made the Pharisees angry, and he also then, which are the Jewish elite, and he also made angry the Roman Empire as he was talking about this new kingdom that's coming, and so that made them very nervous. Ultimately, he died and was killed by the Romans, and we talked about how that ultimately Christians believe that was atonement, that those different Jewish sacrifices that happened, that Jesus was ultimately this perfect sacrifice, and you no longer had to do this. And we talked about how this wasn't necessarily, according to like Jesus, a new religion, but just kind of the end of the story. And so Christians and Jews kind of believe different ends of the stories. Jewish people would believe that the story's not done. They're still waiting for a Messiah. Those that are Christians would say that Jesus was that Messiah that they were looking for. It just wasn't a political leader like they expected. Jesus talked a lot during his life about grace and love, and that it's not about by works, that a person can be saved. And so we see a tension kind of between these two beliefs. Christianity is a universal religion, meaning that people can convert to it. It's open to all people. And that's the case here. And so because of this, it will spread. And it will also spread because of Paul of Tarsus. And we talked about that and how he was a Roman citizen and a Jewish elite. And that allowed him to travel and spread the word about this Christian religion that was kind of going forth. And remember, we also said Christians also was a word given to the followers of Jesus. It wasn't actually a term they gave themselves. It was almost like a derogatory term. So just kind of interesting things that you need to be ready for on the test. Understand those different things, you'll be in good shape. Also check out the other things listed online, and have a good one.